Guys, I have a problem. Ever since starting this channel, I've started wanting to review almost every single game I play, but as you can tell by my upload rate, that isn't actually happening. I've developed a bad habit of half writing little scripts for every game I play and then just letting them collect dust in my YouTube folder when the next new game comes along. Part of the problem is that I have a full-time job, which makes it really hard for me to put out multiple well-scripted videos a month. But another problem is that a lot of these games, while good, don't lend themselves to a full-blown video review, at least not in my style. This may be because they have a pretty simple premise and are easy to explain, or perhaps I just don't feel like I have too much to add to the conversation. But I don't want to just not talk about something I like because it won't necessarily do well on YouTube, or because it will take resources away from other videos. That just doesn't feel right with me. So this video, or maybe even series, is a kind of middle ground way for me to talk about these games without spending a month making a video on each of them. So let's see how this goes, shall we? On to the first game. Set in an alternate reality late 90s and early 2000s, Hypnospace Outlaw takes place inside Hypnospace, an operating system and internet browser that you connect to in your mind while you're sleeping, kind of like a Matrix-y VR. It's heavily based on the real-life GeoCities, which was a hugely popular web service that ran from 1994 to 2009 that allowed users the ability to create and share their own websites that were grouped into communities by topic. In the game, you take on the role of a Hypnospace moderator, removing things like copyright violations, harassing messages, or viruses.
Oh my gosh guys, please keep the memes out of general.
The gameplay mainly involves going from site to site and thoroughly exploring them for violations, keeping an eye out for hidden links and other small puzzles. There are collectibles like music downloads, animated characters for your desktop, little programs or desktop wallpapers, all to reward exploration, but you can also completely ignore these if you want. The gameplay might be simple, but what I think makes this game worth playing is just how it manages to capture this era of the internet and gamify it to make it more fun and approachable. I didn't get a chance to participate in this era of the internet, I wasn't even alive for a good part of it, but in preparation for this video, I spent some time browsing GeoCities archives, and I'd say that the game captures the vibe and style of those pages really well. Pages will auto-launch annoying songs as soon as you open them, zany, tacky fonts and GIFs are everywhere, and the creators of these pages generally seem to lack a sense of aesthetics. But this was before Instagram, before Facebook, before MySpace. There were no rules, there were no website builders, nobody here had a Squarespace sponsorship to build an amazing site with. Did you think I was going to do it for a second there? GeoCities just gave you a page to create stuff and people had to make do with the tools they had. And while these pages look tacky and amateur now, they have a certain authenticity that's really endearing to me. And Hypnospace Outlaw does a phenomenal job at not only imitating but also satirizing this amateur style in a way that's funny but still feels really genuine to the real thing. Now the game is obviously going to hit way harder for people who grew up in that era of the internet, but even if you're like me whose first experiences of the internet were in the late 2000s, I still feel like you'll get some nostalgia from this game. Even I can recognize some of the older references like how chit-chat is meant to be like America Online. And I like how this game shows how the internet changes over time and how its users change with it. The game takes place over like a year or two with time jumps at certain points in the story that bring new pages, new communities, and updates to existing pages. So you'll see how certain users appear and drop off over time, while others have long arcs or even respond to your actions. You also see how the community goes from more personal and indie to more corporate. Some people and communities get crushed by the changing rules, while others adapt, with their sites going from small fan pages to being officially supported and selling their own merch. And as someone who's been on the internet long enough for it to go through its own series of changes before my eyes, there's something very relatable in this. I would compare it to how I've seen YouTube change over the nearly 15 years that I've been using it. So if you're into slow burn, lighthearted games and want a little taste of history, or maybe a walk down memory lane, I highly recommend checking out Hypnospace Outlaw. But if being a Reddit mod is a bit too pedestrian for you, if you want to get the feeling of being an elite hacker who whispers,
Heh, I'm in,
after using a simple script, then Hacknet might just be the game for you. Like Hypnospace Outlaw, Hacknet takes place entirely within a computer system. You're a hacker who's been given a powerful hacking software called Hacknet, the system you're playing through in the game. You play using a combination of normal mouse input and entering commands into the terminal. Your world is down here, with each node being a different computer, device, or server that you can connect to. In the beginning, you'll only have a few nodes, but as you do more missions, you'll find and unlock more. Some are just given to you when you start a mission, while others have to be unlocked by hacking other machines on the network or finding hidden IP addresses. If what you're seeing is making your head spin right now, don't worry, you don't need any coding knowledge or anything like that to play this game. If you do know a bit about how coding and or how code works, it'll be helpful in a few scenarios, but it's by no means necessary. The game does a great job at teaching you how to do everything by incrementally introducing and teaching you new concepts through its missions. So once you've been taught something or been given access to a new program, you just have to remember how and where to apply that. For example, to open these ports and get into this machine, I just have to enter these commands to run the appropriate hacking programs in the right order. The real trick is just entering everything while under the time pressure of the target computer's defensive tracing program, which limits the amount of time you have to get in, and managing your RAM, which limits how many programs you can have running at the same time. It might feel clunky at first, but one of the most satisfying things about this game is realizing that you've got these commands down to muscle memory and seeing how fast you can go compared to when you started. It really does make you feel like a hacker when you can just fly through entering commands, get into a system, easily find and copy what you were looking for, and then delete all trace you were there and get out of the system in less than a few minutes. But one problem with Hacknet is that it just doesn't have much exploration, at least in the base campaign. While there are some secrets to find, most of the extra stuff you find in the computers you hack are just kind of boring text files everywhere that seem to have been taken from some forum called bash.org. And since these always just contain some silly joke and repeat a ton across various machines, I got tired of seeing them really fast. I just wish there were some more interesting things to find and more emphasis on open exploration. Almost every node you explore is given to you as part of the linear story or as a mission, and there aren't many interesting things to find on your own initiative. And I think this is a big missed opportunity, thematically and gameplay wise, because the essence of being a hacker, at least in my eyes, is getting into systems you shouldn't be in and finding stuff. And the game doesn't really encourage or even have that outside of the main story and side quests. Like, if I'm playing a hacking game, it shouldn't always kind of feel like I'm on rails, if that makes sense. Luckily, the game's Steam Workshop content helps with this, with many custom campaigns that focus on just giving you a ton of puzzles to complete and find. I love when developers support custom content like this. Having good Steam Workshop support is just such a huge win in my book. So yeah, if you're looking for a hacking game, I'd say this is a good place to start. Not like I've actually played any hacking games besides this one, but now I do want to try some out. The next game up is DeltaV Rings of Saturn, a 2D top-down space mining sim set, surprise surprise, in the Rings of Saturn. In a very loose sense, the game kind of works like an extraction shooter where your base is a station around one of Saturn's moons, and from there you do dives into Saturn's rings. There you mine, discover new stations or locations, run into NPC ships, and face random encounters, all while managing your resources and fuel so you can get home. What I really like is how the game takes a very hard sci-fi realism approach to everything. Like how movement works, how you maintain your ship and upgrade it, or how the economy or even travel works. For example, having realistic physics means that objects in motion will stay in motion, and since space is frictionless, that means your ship or any objects you bump into will stay moving in the same direction and at the same velocity until something acts on them. So if you get into a clear patch of space with no asteroids, you can just coast to save fuel. It also means you have to be really careful with how you move because you can easily get to a speed where you can't slow down in time to avoid a rock with your maneuvering thrusters. The ore you mine will also move around inside your cargo hold depending on how your ship moves, so if you don't close your cargo hatch, you could end up puking them all out when you decelerate your ship, and inertia carries everything to the front. I also really appreciate the level of customization you can go into with your ship. There are a decent amount of ship types and upgrades for you to try out, like lasers, mass drivers, railguns, drones, mining robots, and manipulator arms. I like to go with a big ship with a huge cargo hold that has microwave arrays on the front and sides to melt asteroids, hauler drones to bring ore into my ship, and a refinery module in the cargo hold to smelt ore down to save space and replenish fuel. And I really like how a lot of these are based on plausible technologies. It really enhances the hard sci-fi flavor of the world. Even the UI your ship has is a piece of equipment, which is a great way to implement changing the style of your screen in-universe. You can even tune individual modules, which is cool, even if I'm not going to do that because it looks complicated and I'm dumb. My only complaint about the game, which could be a positive depending on your taste, is that Rings of Saturn really doesn't hold you by the hand, at all. And I think the problem is that accessing some of the content in the game is pretty tedious, and at the same time, the game doesn't really tell me why I should be interested in doing it. For example, I ran into a ship doing bounty hunting, and they said I could join their faction if I helped them, but my mining ship was too slow and clunky to help. The solution here is obvious, right? Get a smaller and more maneuverable ship, find another bounty hunter, and actually help them. But like, that would take around 30 to 40 minutes at least, and how exactly is this bounty system going to be more fun or interesting than turning in bounties in any other game? You know, like what's the hook? Definitely not going to be because of the combat, because after the novelty of maneuvering in Zero G wore off, I found that combat got old pretty quickly. Sure, you could say I should be exploring it for curiosity's sake, but when I have so many other games to play, you need to entice me a little bit more. Let me try hunting some basic bounties from the station, give me a taste of the gameplay and the rewards, you know? On a similar note, apparently there's also a main story, but I've been stuck on the same quest for like 10 hours where I have to find some girl on a station out in the rings. I think it's taking so long because revealing these stations seems to rely on random encounters and your crew randomly discovering coordinates for you to check out. From what I've read, my game isn't bugged or anything, but I just need to do a lot more searching. And I don't know about this. On the one hand, I think that elusive stories are interesting, but on the other hand, I think you need to idiot-proof things just a bit if someone who likes to explore is still going like 10 hours without any story progression. But this game is only like $10, so even if you don't do much story stuff, I still think it's worth it if you like hard sci-fi shows, games, and books like The Expanse, which is one of my favorite series, and I'll always take the chance to dick ride it if it's appropriate. Please go watch it, it's awesome. But even if I didn't engage with some of the other aspects of Rings of Saturn, I still think I got my money's worth from the 25 hours or so of time I spent mining and trying out different things. Okay, so complete tonal shift for the video here. You guys remember Nam, right? Not a great time, but what if we didn't have to look at the bad stuff? That makes it better, right? Radio Commander is a unique take on the RTS genre that takes the fog of war present in other RTS games and cranks it up to the max. You never even see your soldiers. Instead of controlling your troops by selecting them and clicking on a place or an enemy, all your commands are given via radio, using a tabletop map as reference. Pulling up the radio, you can tell them coordinates to go to, ask them to report their status or position, ask them if they see any enemies, and so on. But aside from when some mission objectives update, you're the one in charge of tracking everything from your soldiers' callouts on the map, like where the enemy and where your troops are. Luckily, the game gives you a lot of tools to help with this. It's kind of like Tabletop Simulator. You can create and move little tiles around to mark enemies or friendlies, draw on it, create area markers, measure distance, or create notes, and it just feels really good to use. But ultimately, you still have to manually track everything, and during combat this creates an interesting sort of tension. It almost feels like you're playing Battleship, trying to guess where the enemy is moving from limited information. It's easy for things to get lost in the shuffle as radio messages pour in at the start of combat, which can lead to the situation on the ground looking different from what you've got in your head or on your board if you really aren't on the ball with recording every detail that comes in. For example, you could tell one of your units to move somewhere but not record the position accurately, so later you realize they're a bit closer to the enemy than you expected. Another way this can come into play is that units will sometimes maneuver a little bit during the start of combat to engage enemies. They'll let you know that they're doing this, of course, but it can be easy to miss, and sometimes you might not even feel the need to keep track of these little small changes on your map. But one time this ended up biting me in the ass when I ended up calling an airstrike on my own guys since they'd moved way closer to the enemy than I expected. By the time I'd realized my mistake, it was too late to pull them back, and I ended up with like 20 guys wounded. But I'm sure the American army would have thought these were acceptable losses though, so it's all good.
Stop whining, Kovacs. The body count's in our favor.
The fog of war even applies to your own units. They'll often report that they see unknown soldiers, only for one of your other squads to pipe up on the radio saying that they probably just spotted them since they're operating in that area. And this creates some tension because sometimes you'll hear a call out expecting enemy just to realize or hear it was a false alarm, but then other times you'll hear them call out that they see something and you'll assume it's a false alarm, but then nobody will get on the radio to say like, oh hey, that's me, and you realize, oh shit, that's enemy. I also like that the game stays more realistic and doesn't force through useless chatter on the radio to give you an idea of what's going on. Nobody's going on the mic to shout their dying words all over the airwaves. It creates this separation from combat that I feel is a little bit more realistic, given the role that you're playing in this game. Like in most strategy games, you're essentially an omnipotent being floating above the battlefield and you don't really have a human relationship to your soldiers. But in Radio Commander, sure, you may be a high rank and you might be making important decisions, but you're ultimately still human. You aren't in the fight and you're safe at base. You don't get to see the consequences of your mistakes, and that's, in a way, somewhat more impactful than being able to see your troops getting cut down. This might not be the most complicated RTS game in terms of combat mechanics, but I think that the novelty of how this perspective you play in depicts the fog of war makes this game worth checking out. I mean, if it's making me think this deeply about it, that probably means something, right? Okay, so our last game for this video is Thief Simulator. I know it got a sequel recently, but I had this one in my library, so I just decided to give it a whirl. Like most sim games of this type, the story here is mainly window dressing, serving to guide the player through unlocking different items and mechanics. And don't mistake this for a bad thing, it works here because the game doesn't really force you to go through the main quest. The game world is made up of a bunch of zones that have different houses you can steal from at any time, which, by the way, is a great way to build up some early game money for upgrades. You'll of course run into obstacles you can't get past with your current gear, but that just makes it all the more satisfying when you finally unlock the tool you need to get into a place. Getting past a door or fence that previously stumped you and just going ham, stealing everything that isn't bolted down, is a great feeling. And there's a good amount of variety to the tools you unlock, more than most games that have some thievery. For example, you have multiple types of lockpick, window glass cutters, hacking tools, and car key cloners for stealing cars. You also have gear that helps you collect information, which is a big part of the game. All the NPCs that live in a house have set routines they follow, like leaving the house or going to certain rooms, that's at first unknown to you but can be gradually revealed through observation. One of the items you can get is a camera that you can place in people's mailboxes that'll reveal their schedule after some time. These mechanics reward you for being patient and doing prep work by letting you choose better times to rob a place, like when everyone is out of the house. You can also go on your computer in your base and buy information about different targets, like possible entry points or tips about where loot might be. Thief Simulator's stealth system is also decently complex. People can detect you by sound as well as by sight, they can notice you've stolen things and then call the cops, and in more advanced houses there are often multiple security systems to disable. And something to point out is that the game is called Thief Simulator, not Armed Robbery Simulator. So you can't do like stealth takedowns or fight back when the police are called, you have to run. And I honestly like this because the game would just be way too easy if you could just walk into a house, put everyone into a chokehold, and then just loot freely. In my opinion though, the police are a bit too easy to avoid, as you can do the classic hide in a dumpster or in a closet thing that so many stealth games have, but the police rarely actually check these hiding spots. So once you get into one of them, it kind of trivializes the whole police chase mechanic. But on the other hand, outside of hiding spots, it almost feels like the police or guards are a bit overtuned. If you get spotted and are close to one of them, they can whip out the taser nearly instantly. Also, it doesn't really seem like bushes do anything to obscure you and make you harder to detect sometimes, it's really hit or miss. I also like how you need to refine some of the items you steal. Like, most can just be immediately sold at the pawn shop, but some items like jewelry you need to remove the gems or you'll have to hack into locked phones. I just hope they expand on this in the sequel because despite being good in concept, kind of connecting you to your work a little bit more, it doesn't take much skill and this quickly just becomes busy work. Regardless, my time with Thief Simulator was more fun than I expected to be with how janky it looks, so if you like stealth and looting shit, maybe check this game out. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed this one. As I said at the beginning of the video, this is a new format I'm trying out, so please let me know what you think about it down in the comments, if there's anything I can do to make it better. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.